The time for this debate has now concluded, so we call on Government Order of the Day number 1.
Climate Change Response, Emissions Trading and Other Matters Amendment Bill, Committee Stage.
I declare the House in committee for the consideration of the Climate Change Response, Emissions Trading and Other Measures Amendment Bill. Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Speaker. Members, the House and Committee on the Climate Change Response, Emissions Trading and Other Matters Amendment Bill. The question is that Part 1 stand part. I call Charles Chauvel.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, I want to just mention at the outset of this contribution that my colleague Moana Mackie is unable to speak in the House today. She is our spokesperson on climate change issues and she is ill. But I'm very pleased to rise and make a contribution as a former spokesperson on the issue. I, Sir, just want to make a couple of points about Part 1. It is the major part of the Climate Change Response, Emissions Trading Other Matters Amendment Bill by a country mile. Of the 103 clauses and the schedule in this bill, fully 102, apart from clauses 1, 2 and 3, appear in Part 1. And so it's to be expected that the bulk of the debate will be concentrated on this part. And as was said in the earlier stages of this debate, Sir, and also by many submitters in the Select Committee whose submissions I've had the opportunity to read, the bill is a great disappointment to those who would see progress on the issue of climate change in New Zealand. The legislation is fundamentally flawed, it's rushed, and it will do nothing to curb the growth in New Zealand's gross greenhouse gas emissions. Indeed, Sir, the provisions of Part 1 simply reflect the delusion that seems to have seized the government that the environment and the economy are contrary forces to be balanced against each other, when actually they are two sides of the same coin and need to be seen properly as dependent upon one another. And so the weakening of the emissions trading scheme that this part will substantially accomplish if it's passed will make New Zealand absolutely struggle to meet what is even the government's target of 50% reduction in emissions by the year 2050. So it's instructive to compare what the provisions of this part would do with what the government promised when it campaigned for election in 2008, once Labor had actually legislated for an emissions trading scheme for New Zealand. And these were the promises, Sir. Changes that National said it would bring in would be fiscally neutral. Well, that promise is already broken, and this part will ensure that it is further broken. The government themselves have estimated that this legislation will cost some $328 million. That's the size of the subsidy that this Parliament will be enacting if it passes Part 1, Sir. The Sustainability Council thinks that the subsidy is about 4 times that number, $1.3 billion. That is what Part 1 will accomplish if it passes in its current form. And this is on the top of the 51 million tonne deficit that the emissions trading scheme now contains, which is also estimated to cost around $1.3 billion at the current carbon cap price. This, Sir, is simply a continuation of National's approach of passing costs onto New Zealand taxpayers to reduce costs for polluters. And, Sir, this government's tinkering is doing more harm than good. There is no certainty in the business environment. We all, I think, agree that that is a fundamental thing that we ought to be providing, certainty to businesses so that they can get on and plan, they can get on and order their affairs. Well, if the rules change every year, if the commitments just go on to the never never every year, if the promises are postponed every year, then there is certainly no certainty for business or for any other actors in this particular part of the economy. This bill fails to target some of the crucial issues within the emissions trading scheme. For example, the influx of cheap international units, making the price of carbon in New Zealand lower than other schemes, and making for a large deficit in our emissions trading scheme. And so what the part shows is that National is happy to manage the slow decline of New Zealand rather than moving forwards to a clean and clever low-carbon economy. That was the intention, sir, of the original emissions trading scheme, Mr Chairman.
Charles Chevelle.
And this part of the bill simply takes us further and further away from that original intention. Well, sir, Labour is not content to fall behind the rest of the world, and we will be voting against this part of the bill. Now, sir, my colleague Moana Maki has put forward a number of amendments that would go some way to fixing some of the damage that this part would cause. There's supplementary order paper number 144, sir, where Moana Maki's amendments would provide for a transitional phase-out of the 2-for-1 surrender of units and a transitional carbon cap price. So that's a very good supplementary order paper, and I want to commend it to the House. She also has on the table supplementary order paper number 142, which would require 50% of units surrendered to be New Zealand units. That would help to deal with the problem that I mentioned earlier of the influx of units that is so undermining the scheme and the price in New Zealand. She also, in supplementary order paper number 146, has amendments to clauses 42 and 71 that would provide for some transparency here. I remember when Dr Smith was the minister responsible, and he always said that the most transparent regime that we could achieve in this area would be the best one from the point of view of the public. Well, I agree. So does Moana Maki, and what she's done is put forward an amendment that would provide for that by ensuring that the costs that are actually faced by consumers and taxpayers would have to be published by the government, so that the public could actually have an idea of what this massive transfer, this massive subsidy scheme, which is what the emissions trading scheme has become, is actually costing consumers and taxpayers. And it's a very good amendment, and I commend it to the Committee of the Whole. Moana Maki also has an amendment in supplementary order paper number 141, which would delete clause 96 relating to the application of the emissions trading scheme to the agriculture sector. Now, sir, I said earlier there can be no certainty in a scheme where there is constant reviews being undertaken and where deadlines are continually being put out, and where, in New Zealand's case, the largest source of emissions, the primary sector, is simply being given the message that it will never be bound by the emissions trading scheme. And Mr Ardern asks, where's the science? Well, the fact that a member of this Parliament would ask that question so far into the debate, the fact that the National Party still contains climate change deniers who would say that agriculture and primary production simply doesn't contribute to the problem, is a sad testimony to what a lack of progress we've made in this country on this question, if that contribution can seriously be made in this committee. Sir, there are other amendments that are before the committee in the name of Kennedy Graham. He has put forward a comprehensive supplementary order paper number 147. I think there are a number of measures in that supplementary order paper that the committee should pay close attention to and give careful consideration to. Many of them, at least on my first blush reading of them, seem to make a lot of sense, and I want to commend Dr Graham for having put those amendments in front of the committee. I hope that we will see some careful consideration of them, because as we've heard in previous contributions, the sort of scrutiny that this legislation got in the Select Committee was not the sort of detailed look at this sort of complex economic question that it merits. There was a very truncated select committee process, and that is not what this question deserves. Dr Graham and Moana Maki are both trying to remedy that at this stage of the debate by ensuring that there is material before the committee that allows an alternative view to be considered, and I hope that that will be what happens in this debate, that we hear detailed contributions on it and that we hear a response from the Minister, both to the issues that I've highlighted that Moana Maki's supplementary order papers would deal with, but also to the scheme that is put up in Dr Graham's supplementary order paper. It deserves, I think, at least that courtesy, both because of the importance of the issue and because these are clear bona fide attempts to address in good faith the major problems that we face in this area, sir.
Dr.